Brought to you by JMR Rentals, professional digital cinema and broadcast equipment rentals in Brooklyn, New York. JMRNY.com. And now get 15% off your first rental when you use the promo code WEEKEND. Call 347-721-3400 or email info@jmrny.com for details. Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend, where we go behind the scenes and talk to the creators of independent entertainment. I'm Jason Godbey, and today on the program, we've got some more movie reviews for you. So joining me via Zoom today is our newest No Rest for the Weekend contributor, Miss Maribeth Thueson. Welcome, Maribeth.
Hi, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, it's great to have you finally on the show. You've been writing like a demon for us, and I really appreciate that. It's very, very cool. You've written some great reviews, and for those reviews, you can check out No Rest for the Weekend podcast.com. I'll remind you of that later. Got a lot to talk about, very little time. The first item up for bid is No Time to Die. Tell us about it. What can you tell us about the film?
So at the end of the last film, we see that Bond had retired. He's thrown away his career at MI6. And at the beginning of this film, he's on permanent vacation in Italy with his girlfriend, Madeline Swan. The relationship is getting closer, and she is pressuring him to put to rest the killing of his earlier girlfriend. And just as he is doing that, things go terribly wrong. And he thinks that she has betrayed him, and he cuts her out of his life. And then he goes to Jamaica, and he's on permanent vacation in Jamaica. But there's a scientist who has discovered this DNA-based nanobot weapon. The scientist has gone missing. And so his old CIA pal, Felix Leiter, comes to him and says, hey, we got to go find this guy. And so he says, sure, why not? And that takes us off on the adventure.
Now, I haven't seen the film. I have seen the previous Bond films. First one was Casino Royale, which I really liked. I thought it was great. It was a new direction for Bond. I really liked Daniel Craig. I liked the brutality of the character that he brought. I liked the rawness. I liked the vulnerability that he had. This is sort of the most vulnerable we've seen Bond. He gets hurt. He bleeds when you cut him. And I really liked all that stuff. And then the next few movies proceeded to take all of that stuff out and go back to Bond as indestructible killing machine. Quantum of Solace, the next one he was in, is a mess. It's got a gobbledygook plot that makes no sense. It's all over the place, and in general, it's just very confusing. Skyfall kind of brings it back. That's when I think Sam Mendes came on board and really kind of got the act together, and they brought the story back, and some great people in it. There's a lot of great stuff for Judi Dench to do in that film. Got a little Albert Finney at the end. People have compared it to Home Alone with the booby traps and everything that happened, but it's fun, and the story is good, and it's got an emotional impact. The plot, again, is this weird kind of gobbledygook where a guy intends to be imprisoned, and some of the logic of these films, it's always been insane. The recent films have had less insanity in the plot than some of the other ones, and kind of less ridiculousness, but, still insane, weird plots nonetheless. And then Spectre, which I thought looked really good, also didn't make a hell of a lot of sense, and there was a lot of big action set pieces that felt like they were written before the movie was even, the rest of the movie was written. It was just kind of like, let's get a plot together to tie together these big set pieces. I like the Blofeld character, but I hate this, like, he's Bond's half-brother, and he's the author of all your pain, and it's one master organization. It's kind of like, we read comic books too, guys. I understand, what you're going for. My question for you is, does this continue the same storyline? So Spectre is still involved, right?
Yes, it does continue the same storyline, and it attempts to wrap up that storyline as well as the one from Casino Royale. And the plot is rather convoluted. After they go to find this scientist, they find out that there's this convention of Spectre, and everybody from Spectre is going to be there in Cuba. So they go there. He gets an assistance from a new CIA agent who is this young woman who's great. She's in the film for a few minutes, kicks ass, and then leaves, but she's great.
That's Ana de Armas, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, he starred with her in Knives Out.
Yeah.
And she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's great in this. Then all of a sudden, and I hope I'm not giving too much away here, the DNA weapon is released. It's supposed to have triggered it can be targeted because it's DNA based. So it's supposed to have targeted Bond, but something goes wrong, and instead it targets all of the Spectre people there. and, and so Spectre is involved, and so they think that Blofeld is in charge of all of this. So he's in prison, and he reappears, played by
Christoph Waltz.
Christopher Waltz, thank you. But then it turns out that he's not the one who did that. It was somebody else. And that person turns out to be Rami Malek as Lucifer Safin. Great name. So you actually have kind of two villains here, but Rami Malek doesn't appear until more than halfway through the film. And when he does, he's very quiet, and he appears to be quietly menacing, but he's just not. And so forget about the plot. You get the action sequences, which are great. But the thing is, the emotional part of Bond and the vulnerability that you mentioned earlier is really enhanced in this movie. That is what made this film so good for me, is not the plot points, but the emotional points.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it. I feel like it's getting pretty good reviews right now, and I've heard it's a pretty good send off for Daniel Craig. There's a lot of speculation as to who the next Bond is going to be. I think Craig is one of my favorite Bonds. I think he's probably the most human Bond in some way. Sean Connery was just kind of like this blunt, super masculine, misogynist.
Well, and you never saw him doubting himself.
No, not once.
Yeah.
And the same thing, you know, and then you had sort of the tongue in cheek of Roger Moore.
Yeah.
I really kind of don't count George Lazenby. He only did one film.
Poor guy.
And in which he, you know, he gets married, which is kind of dumb for Bond to do, because then he stops being
That's
James
straight
Bond.
from the books, by the way.
That is, yes, I know that's from the, and I think Casino Royale got back to the books. And I also think that was a kind of thing where they had lost the rights to it for a while.
Yeah.
And then, you know, because
There
it was
was a spoof actually made of it in the 60s with a
right.
bunch of different people in it.
Yeah, it was like David Niven, Woody
David
Allen,
Niven was, yeah.
Ursula Andress was also in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, bringing it back to, and then, you know, the biggest difference was they used poker instead of baccarat, however you say that name. Nobody plays that game in this country, so we don't know how to say it. But it's I thought it was great, and I don't know what they're going to do next. But I really kind of wish they had kept that initial direction more. I mean, in Casino Royale, my biggest complaint is that Mads Mikkelsen's villain is a bit ridiculous. Like, he's got like a bleeding eye and he has asthma, and it's like, just pick one mallet, you know, just pick one affliction. And you know, with Rami Malek in this film, I like Rami Malek. I think he's a wonderful actor, but I just kept picturing like Mr. Robot up there.
And he's not got a lot to do, you know. He has this great secret island, kind of like Dr. No, where he's going to manufacture this DNA weapon on a huge scale so he can basically kill everybody in the world. Talk about your ridiculous plot points. But, you know, he just doesn't have a whole lot to do. And, you know, they didn't use him very well.
So, all in all, would you recommend No Time to Die for someone who hasn't seen it?
Yes, I would, whether you're a Bond fan or not. And I did see it in the theater. I like seeing action movies in the theater because you get that big screen and you get the big sound, and that really kind of enhances the experience, I think.
Speaking of theater watching and speaking of big movies, we're going to talk about probably the biggest movie of this year in terms of scope. Maybe, I don't know about box office, that's yet to be determined, but Dune. So Dune is a new adaptation of Frank Herbert's science fiction novel. It's one of the most influential science fiction novels ever written, if not the most in the 20th century. Son of a noble family, I'm reading the IMDb description here. The son of a noble family entrusted with the protection of the most valuable asset in the world and the most vital element in the galaxy. Directed by the great Denis Villeneuve, who I thought did for this movie kind of what he did for Blade Runner. I love Blade Runner 2049. I think that movie's a masterpiece. I think this movie did for Dune fans what 2049 did for Blade Runner fans. I think it's the type of thing, I have to see where you are on Dune, because I don't know. I'm not a huge Dune head. Like, I didn't read any of the books. I saw the David Lynch film like a billion years ago and totally forgot it. And I've seen clips of it since, and I'm like, man, was that weird. No wonder why I forgot it. But it's a new adaptation, and it should be said that it's a part one. It's part one of two for the first novel. So, first question: are you a Dune person? Were you like really into the books and stuff like that?
I did read all of the original novels, yes. I wouldn't really describe myself as a Dune head, but I do know the characters. I do know that the spice must flow. And I did, of course, see the first movie.
Yeah, the first movie it's kind of like a movie that's before its time. Some movies are ahead of their time. That movie's like the technology needed to really make this movie didn't exist really till now.
The book is huge. And the first movie attempted to do the whole book, which I think led to, it was too crowded with stuff. And one thing that really bugged me is in the book, a lot of stuff happens inside people's heads. In fact, there are people who speak to each other with their minds. And so everything then is inside their heads. And in a novel, that's easy to do, but how do you do that in a movie? So the first movie had these whispered voiceovers by various characters through the whole film. So annoying. At least this one didn't do that.
Yeah, I thought, now I don't know if it's in the book, but one thing that I really thought was cool, because we didn't have those telepathic, because you're right, you're just, because it's going to be too hammy and corny, and it's just going to and it's also, I think, confusing. But in this one, they actually use sign language, which I thought was, I don't know if that's an element in the book, but I thought the sign language was great. And, the other thing that I wanted to talk about with this movie, I didn't get the theatrical experience. So I think this movie is probably a big screen movie. I saw it on HBO Max. I did watch it twice. The first time I watched it, I thought it's a little slow and exposition heavy in the beginning, but then it really kind of, the second act really kind of like kicks it off. And, basically when more of the action starts. And I thought that was all brilliant and really exciting. And then it just kind of ends. It's just like,
well, it's worth pointing out again that this new movie is only the first half of the book. And when they finished it, they weren't even sure they were going to be able to make the second half. It has been greenlit now. They are going to make it. We have a 2023 opening date on it. But yes, it does end rather abruptly. And that has been a source of some complaint, I understand. But, there will be more to come.
The thing that I've heard it compared to is the ending of Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
If you did not read the books, which I didn't, I sat in the theater for 3 hours, and when Frodo and Sam just kind of take off, I'm like, wait, that's it? Credits?
Yeah.
I thought we were going to Mordor. And there's always one guy who stands up in the theater and goes, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
I've been here this long and it's over. And then, and then some nerd goes, yeah, dude, there's 2 more books. You have to, there's going to be 3 of these things. The other comparison that I've heard and that I really started to notice, and to the point where I thought maybe George Lucas should have sent Frank Herbert a check a long time ago. So this book came out in 1965.
Yeah.
Star Wars came out in 1977. It was written in the 70s, but there are a lot of similarities. The desert planet, there's an emperor. You've got basically the Force with this order that's not, they don't have swords or anything, but they're kind of like Jedi nuns. And they have a Jedi mind trick where you, if you speak in this certain voice, you can make people do what you want them to do. Of course, it's way more lethal than the Jedi mind trick was ever in Star Wars. And then the thing I noticed about the sandworms is that they kind of resemble a Sarlacc pit in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
With the teeth and everything. These were done, in a magnificent CGI as opposed to the practical thing that, George had back in 1983. I thought there was lots of similarities there, and I thought, wow, when because people say I was not a Dune person, they're like total Dune heads who read all the books, they know all the lore, but I was not one of those people. And then when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, talk about one of the most influential science fiction books. This is definitely influential. You can see the influence in other things. The design of this movie is magnificent. It's breathtaking.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Go for it.
This is one reason to see it in a theater on a big screen, is because the design is phenomenal. The spaceships, you've never seen spaceships like these. You know, these are not things like the Millennium Falcon with all kinds of doodads sticking out all over, or things with fins or anything. They're these big bloated donuts. They have no propulsion apparatus whatsoever. And they're wonderful. When you get down to the more planetary level, you do have what are basically helicopters, but instead of having rotors, they have dragonfly wings that vibrate. I mean, you know, that's a cool idea.
I think they're called ornithopters, or
Oh,
you know,
okay.
they call them thropters, I think.
Yeah, thrusters.
But yeah,
Yeah.
just magnificent,
and and
amazing
and and
design.
and then you get the desert. So there have been comparisons to Lawrence of Arabia. The first shot you get in the movie really is of the desert, and you get these overhead shots as they're going over the dunes, and you see the patterns of the light and the shadow on the dunes. It's just beautiful. And then the palace where they live, and let's talk about in the Atreides home world, and in their home palace. That's a pretty great place too. That's an ocean world. So then you get lots of ocean. There's waves of ocean and waves of sand.
What I liked about it too, it's a nice juxtaposition of the two worlds. So you see the differences between Arrakis and Callahan, what the name of the
The Atreides
Atreides
home
home
world,
planet.
whatever it is.
So
Yes.
so it's very different, and you could see why these people who are used to, you know, like water and trees and you know, would be completely out of place in this barren desert. And they really they shot it, I believe, in Abu Dhabi, and I heard that they could only film for like a couple of hours a day because once the sun hit, it was so hot you couldn't stand to be out there for, you know, shooting for hours and
And,
hours.
and I noticed that it seemed like a lot of the shots were either in the very early morning or the evening. There was very not much that was in full daylight. Yeah, so you're probably absolutely right about that.
And it makes sense because like if you were those people, you wouldn't be hanging out at, you know, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You'd be toast. And they have those amazing still suits, which is so cool. That whole design looks great. The functionality, everything is kind of like a form for function and not for fashion. On their home world, they were more royal dressed and everything. Here, they've got to be utilitarian, and everybody's got to be dressed for the desert, no matter kind of where they are. I wouldn't call it like an action movie per se, but there is some pretty good action in it. There's some really, you know, cool knife fighting. One thing I wanted to ask you, sir, if you read the book, I don't know how well you remember it. I know that there's a thing where they've kind of abandoned computers because technology has sort of failed. This is set in the year 10,100 something, but like, why do they not have guns? Like, they obviously go to war. They've got ships with giant cannons, but
Yeah.
they fight with swords. The sword fighting is amazing. It's so cool. But like handguns, pistols, you know, rifles, automatic weapons. Why do you not have any? If you have armies, how come you don't have any projectile weapons? Is
Yeah.
my question.
Yep. I know. I thought the same thing. Because that is this world. That's all. That's all I can say.
The other thing that I really noticed about it too is the not so subtle Middle East allegories. I mean, spice is basically oil and opium, which are both found in the Middle East. There is a lot of not so subtle kind of allusion to that. The look of everything, like it's very Arabic in design. Uh,
Some of the words, the names are Arabic as well.
right. I believe in the book he uses the word jihad,
Yes.
which obviously you could, in a post 9/11 world you can't use that, but in 1965 nobody in the West had really heard or used any of this language.
And colonialism as well. I mean, when the Imperium, either in the form of the Harkonnens or the Atreides, come to the world to extract the spice, they are stomping on the necks of the native Fremen there. That's Britain and France all over the place in the Middle East, right?
There's definitely the colonization is a big theme. So you have Atreides, the Duke, and he's trying to be benevolent. You know, he's like, this is my fiefdom. The emperor's given it to me. I may have to go into your desert if I'm ordered to, but listen, I'm going to leave your homes alone. Where everything's simpatico. I'm going to do right by you guys. Whereas the Harcadians, I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of these names right, but they are Harkonians. But like they're
Harkonnen, I think.
Harkonnen. That's how they say it
Yeah.
in this movie. Although I've heard it pronounced differently, but they're kind of evil, very imperialistic. You've got the leader of the people, and you've got his chief second, he's very good in it, but he doesn't get a lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Dave Bautista. But
Mm-hmm.
like Stellan Skarsgård, who plays the baddie, the sort of
The Baron.
the
Yeah.
Baron, is gross.
Yeah.
He's a little less gross and cartoonish than in the David Lynch version, but gross nonetheless.
He's grotesque physically and grotesque morally.
Even Josh Brolin, when he's counseling young Paul Atreides, says, you know, these people are brutal. They're not even human. They're awful. I feel all in all, you know, I think people who read the book will respect the fact that they didn't try to do too much. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't try to pack 4 hours into two. And I think the movie reigns in at about 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was about enough Dune for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to, you know, I'm happy to take the break and then see another 2.5 hours later
Yeah.
instead of trying to cram. Like, I mean, the Lynch movie really just tries to cram that whole book in there, and a lot of it just doesn't work, and it's awkward and bad. I know they also tried to make a mini series of Dune. That was kind of ill-fated. That didn't work. But this, I think people will like. And I, as a non-Dune fan, I thought it was pretty darn good. I really liked it, and I wouldn't mind seeing it in the theater. I think seeing it in IMAX would be amazing. But you know, it's a lot of movie.
Two things. One more reason to see it in the theater is also the sound. The music, which is by Hans Zimmer, is this combination of percussion and howling noises and bagpipes and all kinds of stuff. And I wouldn't say you notice it in a bad way, but if you're listening and pay attention, you notice it, and it really sometimes propels the scene forward. Sometimes it really sets the mood. It's a really unusual soundtrack, but it sounds great in the theater. And the second part is it being a lot of movie and sometimes having slow parts and taking time and so forth. Taking time with the characters and what they're going through and what they're feeling, I think is really great that they do take that time. Dune itself has big themes. You know, it's the intersection of power and religion, and how religions get started, and how a person becomes a myth, becomes a legend, becomes a religion. You know, and so there's a lot going on there. Like I said, in an interior kind of way. I think in the next movie we'll get a little more of that action that we're expecting. And just to mention of some of the other actors, Jason Momoa, so fun, only fun character there. He's the only one who really looks like he's having a good time out there in the desert, you know. And Timothy Chalamet as Paul, maybe not who I would have picked. I mean, he's this skinny kid, you know, and that's not who my vision of Paul was. But, you know, the camera comes in on his face and those, you know, soulful, poetic eyes of his. And all of a sudden I go, okay, this could be Paul. And then all of a sudden he shows up in these knife fights. You go, wait a minute. How did that happen? And Rebecca Ferguson as his mother, she is really great. Definitely thumbs up for everything. Go see it, even if you don't know Dune, if you haven't read it. But if you have, I think you really will still appreciate it.
It's definitely a recommendation for me as well. I may spend the bucks and go see it in IMAX just to experience. I was really glad that I saw 2049 in the theater, just because that movie is such a big scope, and I think, you know, when you feel that walking through the desert and those big, I think probably even though the first half of the movie is a little bit slow, it's probably helped out by the sheer spectacle and by the experience of seeing it in a film, where maybe seeing it on the smaller screen does not help it. All right, so that's two recommendations. We're not going to get to The Last Duel because we're running out of time, but We can come back with that next time. For now, if you want to read more movie reviews from Maribeth, she has written some great ones. Check out No Rest for the Weekend podcast.com. And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. I'd like to thank Maribeth Thueson for sticking with us and writing for us and being a part of the show. And I'd like to give a big shout out and a thanks to our sponsor, JMR Rentals. For Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.